Welcome back to UK Flicks, the channel where no story stays buried and no secret stays hidden for long. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most heartbreaking, shocking, and frankly jaw-dropping stories to come out of reality television in recent memory. And if you think you've heard it all, trust us, you haven't heard this. Her name is Elizabeth Johnston. You know her. You watched her grow up on your television screens as part of one of America's most beloved reality TV families, the 7 Little Johnstons. A family that opened their doors, their hearts, and their lives to millions of viewers around the world. But behind the smiles, behind the cameras, and behind the carefully edited episodes, something was unraveling. Something dark. Something deeply painful. A secret debt of $240,000. A hidden girlfriend named Jennifer, stolen dinners at restaurants across the city, and finally, an official divorce signed and sealed on the 17th of April. This is not just a celebrity story. This is a human story. A story about love, betrayal, and picking yourself back up when the person you trusted most tears everything apart. Let's begin. To truly understand the weight of what Elizabeth Johnston has been through, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to understand who she is. Not just as a headline, not just as a reality TV name, but as a real person raised in extraordinary circumstances who deserves so much better than what life recently handed her. Elizabeth Johnston is the daughter of Amber Johnston and Trent Johnston, the stars and the beating heart of TLC's long-running reality series, 7 Little Johnstons. For those who may be unfamiliar with the show, here's a quick portrait. Amber and Trent are a couple living with a condition called achondroplasia, the most common form of dwarfism. Together, they built a family that is nothing short of extraordinary. 5 children, a big house, a loud dinner table, and a philosophy that says, "We live life on our own terms. We live it loudly." The show first premiered back 2015, and almost immediately, it captured something that most reality television fails to capture: authenticity. Viewers didn't tune in to gawk. They tuned in because this family made them feel something. They were funny, they were warm, they argued like every family argues, and they loved like very few families love. Elizabeth was one of the children the audience watched grow up in real time. Season after season, viewers saw her navigate school, friendships, the awkward in-between years of growing up, and eventually, the exciting, terrifying world of young adulthood. She became, for many fans, a kind of surrogate daughter, someone they rooted for, someone they genuinely cared about. And that's what makes this story hit so differently. Because Elizabeth didn't grow up in the anonymous privacy that most of us enjoy. Every milestone, every triumph, every stumble was captured, broadcast, discussed, and dissected by millions of strangers. That is a pressure that very few people will ever truly understand. And yet, by most accounts, Elizabeth handled it with remarkable grace. She was spirited, outspoken, not afraid to voice her opinion, even when it caused a ripple at the family dinner table. Fans loved that about her. She wasn't a background character in her own family's story. She was a lead, a personality in her own right. Every love story has a beginning, a moment when 2 lives cross paths and something shifts, something electric and invisible. And suddenly the world looks different than it did 5 minutes ago. For Elizabeth Johnston, that moment came in the form of a man named Brice. Now, Brice was not a reality television personality. He wasn't someone who had spent years performing for a camera or carefully curating a public image. He came into Elizabeth's life as an outsider, someone from beyond the bubble of the Johnston family world, and in many ways, that was part of his appeal. When Elizabeth first introduced Brice to the public, through social media posts, through carefully shared glimpses of their life together, the reaction from fans was immediate and warm. He seemed charming. He seemed devoted. He smiled in photos the way a man smiles when he genuinely cannot believe how lucky he is. At least that's how it appeared. The couple began their relationship with all the hallmarks of a great love story. There were sweet dates, quiet moments shared online, and the kind of affectionate banter that made fans comment heart emojis by the thousands. Elizabeth seemed happy, genuinely, radiantly happy, in a way that felt real rather than performed. For the Johnston family, this was a moment of pride. Amber and Trent had built their lives on the foundation of love and commitment. They had modeled for their children and for millions of viewers what it looked like to choose your partner every single day, even when it was hard, even when life was messy. Elizabeth falling in love was a continuation of that story, a new chapter opening. And for Elizabeth herself, this was everything she had hoped for: a partner, a companion, someone who would walk beside her into the adult life she was building, independent from the cameras, independent from the script of the show. She trusted him completely. That much is clear in hindsight. She trusted him with her heart, with her future, with her vulnerability. She let him in, all the way in. And Brice Bolden smiled that easy smile of his, and he accepted every bit of it. What Elizabeth didn't know then, what nobody knew then, was that Brice Bolden was carrying secrets. Secrets that were growing heavier by the month. Secrets that would eventually bring the entire relationship crashing down in the most public, painful way imaginable. When Elizabeth Johnston and Brice Bolden announced their engagement, the internet responded with the kind of collective warmth that only happens when people have genuinely invested themselves in someone else's happiness. Comment sections flooded with congratulations. Fan pages dedicated to the Johnston family shared the news far and wide. Amber and Trent, in their characteristically warm and open style, expressed their joy publicly, welcoming Brice into the fold with open arms. The wedding, when it finally arrived, was everything fans had hoped for. It was a beautiful occasion. Thoughtfully planned, emotionally charged, and filled with the kind of genuine moments that cannot be scripted or manufactured. Elizabeth was stunning, the kind of bride who lights up a room not because of what she's wearing, but because of the expression on her face. She was glowing, and that word gets overused, but in this case, there is no better word for it. Brice stood at the altar and said his vows with what appeared to be complete sincerity. He looked into Elizabeth's eyes and made promises. Sacred, serious promises. The kind of promises that are supposed to be unbreakable. Guests wept, family members held each other's hands, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Amber Johnston, the woman who had raised this spirited, brave, wonderful young woman, watched her daughter become a wife. For fans watching from the outside, this felt like the culmination of years of rooting for Elizabeth. They had seen her grow from a teenager finding her footing to a young woman stepping boldly into her future. The wedding felt like a reward. For Elizabeth, yes, but also in a strange way for everyone who had watched and cared. Social media was a tidal wave of joy that day. Photos were shared, screenshots were saved, and the comment sections were filled to overflowing with love and good wishes. And then the cameras went away. The guests went home. The dress was folded and stored. And Elizabeth and Brice began their life together in the quiet, private space that exists beyond the public eye. It was in that quiet space, away from the cameras, away from the fans, that the cracks began to appear. At first, they were barely visible, the kind of hairline fractures you convince yourself aren't really there, the kind that only reveal their true depth when it's already too late. Marriage is never what it looks like from the outside. Every couple, no matter how much they love each other, no matter how perfect their wedding photos appear, carries the full weight of their private reality behind closed doors. And for Elizabeth and Brice, that reality was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Sources close to the family have described the early months of the marriage as something of a honeymoon period. Warm, excited, full of the energy that comes with building a new life together. But as the months passed, things began to shift. Subtle at first, then less subtle. There were arguments, and not the productive kind. Not the kind that end with both people understanding each other a little better. These were arguments that seemed to circle back to the same unresolved issues again and again. Tension that built and never quite released. Elizabeth, by nature, is not someone who suffers in silence. Those who know her well describe a woman who is direct, emotionally intelligent, and unwilling to pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. These are qualities that served her well growing up in a large, outspoken family, but in a marriage where her partner was keeping secrets, large, consequential secrets. Those qualities also meant she was asking the right questions. Questions that Brice wasn't ready to answer honestly. Because here's the thing about secrets. They have a weight to them. They press down on everything. They warp conversations that should be simple. They make a person nervous in ways that seem inexplicable to the person sitting across from them. And over time, that nervousness, that quiet, persistent dishonesty, changes the texture of a relationship entirely. Friends of the couple noticed a change. The easy warmth that had characterized their early relationship became something more guarded, more careful. Brice, who had always come across as relaxed and open, began to seem distracted, absent, even when he was physically present. Elizabeth felt it. Of course she felt it. She was living inside it. She reached out to her family, Amber and Trent, ever the steady pillars of the Johnston household, listened, supported, and encouraged communication. They wanted to see the marriage work. They had welcomed Brice as a son. They believed in the possibility of working through difficulties. But there are some difficulties that cannot be worked through, not because the people involved aren't trying, but because one of them is hiding something so significant that no amount of communication can bridge the gap. When the truth finally came out about Brice Bolden's finances, it landed on Elizabeth and on the wider Johnston family like a freight train. $240,000. That was the number. A staggering, almost incomprehensible figure. A secret debt that Brice had been carrying and carefully concealing for an undisclosed period of time. The details of how this debt accumulated are not entirely public. And out of fairness, we won't speculate on the specifics. But what we can say, what the facts clearly demonstrate, is that this debt was real. It was significant. And Brice had chosen deliberately and repeatedly to hide it. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about the conversations he must have steered away from, the financial discussions he must have deflected, the future plans, about homes, about savings, about building a life together that he must have engaged with while knowing there was a $240,000 weight hanging over everything. That is not a small omission. That is not an awkward conversation that slipped through the cracks. That is a fundamental, sustained deception, one that was woven into the fabric of the marriage from the very beginning. When Elizabeth discovered the truth, the betrayal was enormous. Not just because of the money, though that was serious enough on its own, but because of what it represented. It meant that the man she had married, the man she had stood beside at the altar and made promises to, had looked her in the eye every single day and chosen to lie. An omission, yes, but a lie is a lie, whatever shape it takes. Amber and Trent were devastated. They had raised Elizabeth to value honesty above almost everything else. Their family had built a public life on the principle of openness, of showing the world their reality, unfiltered and authentic. The idea that their daughter's husband had been living a secret life, financially at least, was deeply painful. Family discussions took place, difficult ones, the kind that leave people exhausted and heavy, sitting at kitchen tables long after midnight, trying to figure out what happens next. And all the while, the debt remained. $240,000, sitting there like a wall between what the marriage had been and what it could ever realistically be. But Brice Bolden had already begun thinking about solutions, and the solution he found would destroy everything that remained. Her name